In the mountains of southern Mexico, the rivers crash downstream, and Chiapas is divided by disaster.
There
was one family that spent 5 days without eating. They were trapped by the water. Getting supplies across is hard.
Now you can look across the floodwaters and see communities that have been cut off from civilization. On the other side of this water, an entire Mexican village is isolated, and there's only one way in or out, by rope. Villagers work the lifeline, linking the little town of Nueva Francia to the outside world. They tell us it took them 2 days to string the cable across the torrent, 2 days to send in the first emergency supplies. And they tell us our camera is the first to cross here to witness what the floods have done to their village.
The children are hungry. We couldn't get anything out of our house, and we didn't think the river was going to rise. Our house was washed away, and it took everything with it.
That's a common story and a common sight here.
The river used to flow over there, but now it's coming here. This house, the next house, and the next house. Everything is gone.
Everything except rocks and mud. Rushing water and rolling boulders have destroyed dozens of homes.
Una casa grande, grande. ¿Y dónde está la cocina? La cocina estaba ahí.
Here there stood what villagers describe as a large house. Now this is what's left of the kitchen.
It's amazing what's happened here. It's, never seen before. Especially these areas. The people have been living in these villages for ages and ages, and this is the first time that happens.
Now for the people of Nueva Francia, survival is a matter of keeping food and medicine coming across the river. But one commodity still in abundant supply is faith. In church, children sang a simple song about keeping the faith during trying times. Voices of hope echoing across the water. Doug Miller, 11 News, Chiapas. Along the riverbanks in the town called Huixla, even the sturdiest of buildings are crumbling into the floodwaters, and amid the surviving structures, streets are covered with mud.
The river crossed here, it crossed there, side to side. It corralled us. We didn't have any way out.
The shifting river has dumped deep deposits of mud inside houses here. Victims lucky enough to still have homes are spending days shoveling them out.
We're fixing things. Everything's destroyed, but little by little, we're fixing it.
Little by little, the little town of Huixla is trying to undo the damage. Life here is trying to return to normal, and that may be a problem. Mexican government officials are putting much of the blame for this disaster on what they call irregular settlements on the edges of rivers. The worst of the floodwaters are gone now, but so are many of the people who for generations lived on this riverbank. Once homes stood in this area, now there's nothing but ruins. Enrique Jimenez is still picking through his property on the riverbank. Nothing much is left here for him and his grandchildren. Even his drinking well is now packed full of mud.
Desesperado. Toda la familia, desesperado.
I'm very desperate. The whole family. We're desperate. We've been here many years.
Still, after working this soil for more than 30 years, he plans to stay on the river. No matter the danger, it is a way of life that will survive long after the floods. Doug Miller, 11 News, Chiapas.
Tegucigalpa is one of the oldest cities in this hemisphere. It's also one of the poorest. Hurricane Mitch left its mark on the city's long history of suffering. The Spanish first gave Tegucigalpa its name for the silver hills which they mined centuries ago. Today, those same hills offer nothing but mud and misery. The water took everything, this woman says. Now we are staying in the streets. The city's hope of rebuilding quickly was placed in the hands of its popular mayor, nicknamed El Gordito. Friends say he considered the devastation not as a setback, but as a chance to rebuild a better city. Those dreams ended when the mayor's helicopter crashed as he was surveying the damage. A city already stunned by disaster now has to deal with the loss of its leader. Much of the machinery to help move the mud disappeared when a near tidal wave washed over the place where they were kept. That's why much of the city is shoveling out the mud by hand. And working in the mud is a Honduran native who now lives in Houston. Mario Castellanos came down for his father's funeral. He is the mayor's son.
I'm helping out whatever I can do right now.
At this moment, Mario Castellanos could think of nothing better to honor his father than to pick up a shovel and help rebuild a city. Charles Hadlock, 11 News, Tegucigalpa. Tegucigalpa is a city of contrast, a place of immense beauty and devastating misery. It's a place where Hurricane Mitch became the great equalizer, destroying not only the homes of the poor, but the businesses of the well-to-do.
You got a Chevrolet down there.
This is the car lot of the country's largest Chevrolet dealer. It's now a showplace of scrap iron and mud.
The river came this high and it destroyed everything. It was a nice building right here. You know, it's gone now.
And so are most of the cars. This man owns the dealership. He got his education at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. He says it will be years before his city feels like a city again. Across town, people are lining up for the most important commodity of all.
Whoever is on foot will get the water first. Don't try to fool me or you won't get any.
Within an hour, his water supply is dry and people go away thirsty. In the marketplace where the river came roaring through, the vultures are a reminder that death is in the air. But on the ground, it is the mud that seems insurmountable.
In downtown Tegucigalpa, this is the marketplace. And the only way to get around here is to cross a flimsy bridge made of the debris left behind in the storm.
And on the other side is more mud and misery. In a city of contrast, Hurricane Mitch makes it look all the same. Charles Hadlock, 11 News, Tegucigalpa.
Ron Trevino traveled into Sarajevo with members of the Texas National Guard. A warning, though. Tonight's report contains some disturbing pictures.
Soldiers with the Texas National Guard listen to a CD from home as they drive us into Sarajevo. A road that winds around beautiful tree-lined hills and leads to scenes of stark devastation.
We're up on now at Sniper Alley, where they would fire from both sides. There's plenty of windows, ledges to hide inside of. Nothing moved on these streets.
In Sarajevo, the war has been over for 2 years, but the scars remain at the local newspaper building, the hotel that once housed Olympic athletes. And this is where those Olympians competed. A bobsled run reduced to rubble. Night falls on a city that was once a shining star, but now is home to cemeteries crowded with dead from the war.
This is an eye-opener, and I think it's what we're here about, to not put any more people in there. I think it's one of our missions.
Parts of the city are pitted with holes left by mortar fire. They're filled in and painted red. They're called Sarajevo roses. This one marks the place where more than 20 people were killed as they waited in a bread line.
People screaming, blood all over the place, you know, human legs. People were terrified. This is the first massacre on the Sarajevo street.
Despite all the pain and loss, Sarajevo is showing signs of coming back to life.
Downtown Sarajevo on a Friday night. It looks like a typical European city. The streets are full of people, a sight that would have been hard to imagine only 2 years ago.
Slowly, people are moving back to the city, like this man who moved out of Bosnia during the war.
I think the future is bright. It's my opinion, I don't know. It depends the situation in Europe.
The Houston soldiers who are based here say the NATO peacekeeping mission is working.
The first day I was in Sarajevo, I knew why we were here. It's a noble thing we're doing. These people needed our help, and there's no death. The people are not dying anymore.
It's not certain how long the U.S. troops will stay. In the meantime, Sarajevo is returning to life, enjoying peace, however fragile it might be. In Sarajevo, Bosnia, Ron Trevino, 11 News.
And tomorrow night, Ron takes us to the city of Mostar as he continues his special reports.
Mostar was once one of Bosnia's most beautiful cities. Now, much of what gave this medieval Turkish town its charm is gone, destroyed. It looks as if an earthquake struck, but it was no natural disaster. As even this graffiti points out, it was neighbors killing neighbors.
I think this town only can exist if it's united. So if we live all together, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniak all together, that's the only way for this city to be again as it was before the war.
Mostar gets its name from its bridge, the Mostari Bridge, which now only exists on plates and souvenirs. The 400-year-old structure endured 2 world wars, but could not survive the conflict fought here several years ago. It's been replaced by sterile, cold steel. For the people who live here, the bridge is a constant reminder of what they lost in the war.
But Mostar's saddest reminder of the war, its cemeteries. This one's not too far from the bridge. On many of the grave sites here, the names of children.
Children and so many young men. 200,000 people were killed in the war in Bosnia. What were once children's playgrounds were turned into cemeteries.
A war that could have been prevented, you know. It's a good thing we stepped in. It's sad to see, though. It's sad to see the cemeteries.
Bosnia was once a place defined by bridge building and tolerance. Maybe it will be again someday. Here in Mostar, the pieces of the old bridge are being retrieved from the river.
A team of Hungarian divers is taking it out of the water and putting it on the platform. Then the civilian company is going to come in and put it all back together stone by stone, back to its original form.
The symbolism of that would be hard to miss. But some Bosnians are afraid the bridge, like this country, will be blown apart again if the U.S. and other nations pull out their peacekeepers.
Do you think that the Americans should stay here beyond next summer?
I think yes, because I think that's the only way that this town can be united.
For now, the troops remain, and a country relearns the art of building bridges. In Mostar, Bosnia, Ron Trevino, 11 News.
Well, I've been the trauma director here for 15 years. It's exciting. The thing I like about trauma is you have no idea what's going to come through that door in the next minute or the next hour. It may be very quiet, it may be very busy. You may get some type of unique injury that you've never seen before or that you read about, and you have to be ready for all types of injuries, any type of surgical procedure. My name is Alan Tyrock. I'm the Trauma Medical Director at UMC, the Level 1 Trauma Center for the region. The state of Texas designates 4 levels of trauma centers. There's actually 17 Level 1 trauma centers in the state of Texas, and we are the only one for a 270-mile radius. What a Level 1 trauma center means, it's actually the ultimate level of trauma care being provided to the injured people in a region. And what sets it apart from other trauma designations like 2, 3, and 4 is, 1, the academic expertise, various specialties that other centers don't have, meaning microvascular, replantation, cardiothoracic, and vascular, as well as in-house, meaning in the hospital, trauma surgeons, anesthesiologists, various specialties of the various disciplines, and it's a higher level of care.
Okay, let's intubate.
It is organized chaos, but everybody has a designated role. We practice it, we review it, we talk about it at meetings, so everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do. But if you just watch it, especially a really injured patient, you think, oh my gosh, it's just chaos. But it really is orchestrated chaos.
Can we get 100 of sucks and 20 of
John, get another Curlex. His crush injury between a car and some object. I don't even know what it was. Partial amputation of the left forearm. Pretty bad injury. So let's get 4 Vativan, 10 of Beckeronia. What's the last? And then another 100. And then you need 10 of morphine.
We have good color change.
I know you got the fentanyl.
Breath sounds heard bilaterally.
It lasts longer.
One of the things that's unique about trauma is time is of the essence. I mean, if you have appendicitis, yeah, it's okay to wait a few hours, give the patient antibiotics, and then operate later in the day. But if you're bleeding to death, or if you have no airway, meaning you can't breathe, or your lung is collapsed, you're going to die within minutes. So acute, prompt surgical intervention, resuscitation is of the essence. That's what sets trauma apart from various surgical problems, where there is a little bit more time to evaluate. A good example is burn patients. We don't have a burn center in El Paso. The closest one is in Lubbock. But we can do the initial resuscitation for a burn patient and then transport them hours later to Lubbock for their burn care. Trauma, you don't have that luxury. You got minutes to save a life. Well, the thing I always emphasize is trauma is a team sport. It's not just one person or one physician. It's a whole host of people, especially for the more acutely injured patients. When a patient comes in, there is a trauma attending, which is a trauma surgeon, physician. There's 1 or 2 trauma residents, 2 ER physicians, anesthesiology will come, and they're on standby next to us here. There's at least 2 nurses and 2 ER techs. Respiratory comes in case we have an airway issue. Blood bank will come, EKG tech, as well as a laboratory technician. We actually have blood just standing at the door in case we need it to transfuse immediately. And there's other personnel that show up. The OR crew comes, and security will be here. So you can have 15 to 20 individuals here at one time to take care of the patient.
He's going to go to CAT scan, and we're going to do an arteriogram of the left upper extremity, make sure there's an arterial injury, and then he's going to go to the operating room by the orthopedic surgeons to hopefully salvage the arm. He has a very bad fracture. As you can see, also he has a soft tissue injury to the muscle and the skin, and that all needs to be cleaned up and operated on.
We admit about 2,600 to 2,800 trauma patients a year, but trauma visits to the emergency department can be up to about 10,000. Most of our injuries are blunt trauma, so about 36% are a result of falls. About 23% are of a result of a motor vehicle collision, and so the other 50% are due from stabbings, gunshot wounds, motorcycle collisions.
The intersection of Trans Mountain and North Desert Boulevard. Police tell ABC7 the 24-year-old Benjamin Stewart was pedaling east on Trans Mountain.
Stewart suffered head injuries and remains at Thomason Hospital at this hour.
On October the 4th of 2005, after dinner, we tried to reach our son BJ on the phone, and after a number of attempts, we knew he'd been out bicycle riding and we couldn't reach him, and so we took off and started driving. Our younger son told us he had noticed an accident off the freeway at Trans Mountain Road, and so we decided we better go make sure that was not BJ. And so we drove up, and they still had the access road completely closed off, and so my wife Ann and I parked underneath the freeway off the side and climbed up the embankment. And there we found a crumbled bicycle, BJ's bicycle, and the police told us that he had just been taken away, and they were not sure of his condition. They knew that he was in very, very grave condition when he left the scene of the accident. And so we asked where they had taken him, and they told us that he'd been taken to University Medical Center. And so we drove straight down then to the hospital. And candidly, I will tell you that I was concerned. I didn't know that much. I knew it was the county hospital. And I had my own preconceived ideas about a county hospital. And so I was not sure about the level of care that he could get there. And having seen the bicycle, I knew if he was alive at all, that he was in very serious condition. Over the next few weeks, we would learn a whole different story about the hospital. And we would see the incredible professionalism of the people and the technology that was there and everything that came together that in fact helped restore the life of our son. The police told us later that when the SUV hit BJ, it literally just hit him straight on. It threw BJ up, so it pushed his leg through the frame of the bicycle. He came off of the bike then at that point, and his head hit and went through the windshield of the SUV. The driver threw on his brakes, which then threw him off of the vehicle, and the police said that BJ went 77 feet in the air, hit the pavement, and skid 50 feet down the pavement before he stopped. The first man who got to him, one of the witnesses who was there, thought he was dead. The leg was completely broken, snapped. He had significant bleeding. His liver had been punctured, and tremendous head trauma. They did not think, even when EMS got there, as it turned out, we knew one of the young EMS technicians who was there. He did not even recognize BJ. But he told us later that they did not think BJ would even live through the ride to the hospital, that they thought he'd be dead before they got him there. The level of injury was so bad that the doctors even considered that night that if he stabilized, they considered amputating his leg because they felt like that might help him as far as the rest of his recovery. Thankfully, we learned a few days later that one of the doctors insisted that they leave the leg alone and that he would try to restore it, and indeed he did. BJ's leg is just as good as before.
You have no way of knowing what is ahead, and you just beseech the Lord and you beg him, and that's what we did. We begged the Lord all the way to the hospital. Lord, please just hold him in your hands. Well, little did we know that who was working on him were 8 magnificent doctors who really did do God's bidding. And they felt like, at first, we were told later, that they weren't sure that it was going to be successful, but any surgery, any kind of attempt to save his life. But there was something there, they said, in his demeanor that said, we need to go to work. And they did. And they sat in and they worked for the next 8 hours straight, just to save his life, just to give him that one more chance to have a wonderful life. They had no idea who he was, and yet they gave everything they had in their professional understanding to bring him back to life. And for that, we will always be so grateful.
I've gotten to know a number of people from the hospital, and good people, good staff, incredible leadership team. After I came back from the hospital in California to visit some of the people who had helped me, Miss Irma, And Dr. Tyrock, briefly, he's always in a hurry. That was when Mr. Valenti had stepped up and he'd taken charge of the hospital. He asked me to be a part of 2 ribbon-cutting ceremonies.
I just talked to a lady 2 weeks ago whose friend has a young son there right now at UMC with a serious brain injury. And so, BJ, I think one of the things you should talk about is when you went to the VA center in Palo Alto, they talked to you. You happened to overhear the conversation that they were having with Mom and me about what the chances of your mental recovery were, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And what did you hear them say about your possible recovery?
They were at that point skeptical that I would recover much beyond a 3rd or a 4th grade level. I'm, I guess, more ornery than that, so.
When you were there, did you even know the difference between level 1 and level 2 or anything like that?
I really did not. I knew he was in trauma, and I just knew. I thought that was the same as kind of ER, and I really did not know much. I really gained an education over those next few weeks as we stayed there, and the hospital was so very gracious to us. Though he was in trauma care, they recognized that as a part of as he began to recover, and he was in a coma for 6 weeks. But they recognized the value of him having people around him and hearing familiar voices. It had not been that long before that he'd been in a war zone, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so they felt like it was important for him to know he was home and to hear familiar voices. And so they were very gracious to let us be with him there in the trauma center, and to have other family members and close friends come in and spend time with him while he was there.
% of all our patients are accepted in transfer from various hospitals in the region. Of those, about 2/3 come from New Mexico.
Sorry. Give me a suture. Give me a suture. Direct through your line. So fresh.
Take in a deep breath and hold.
Let's take the oil. Clean that out. Close it.
Don't move, sir. You're almost done. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move.
Make sure he didn't penetrate the spleen or the stomach or the lung. Yeah, it's still bleeding there.
We're done? Yeah. Nothing penetrated?
No, I just hit the rib cage. Looks like he got one of the intercostal arteries. It's pretty lucky.
Being part of the requirements for a level 1 trauma center is that we do research, and this research is to improve the care of a trauma patient. So the collaboration that we have with Texas Tech allows us to perform these required measures.
My job entails that I coordinate and provide trauma courses for doctors and nurses that are mandatory for trauma level 1 of some sort, level 1, 2, 3, or 4, that doctors and nurses are mandated to take. The doctors and nurses have to update their knowledge and skills on the care of the trauma patient on a continuous basis. There's always changes. In order for them to maintain that updated knowledge and skills, they have to attend trauma courses. The other section that I coordinate is community education, and we base our education for the community by zip codes, meaning that if zip code, for example, 79936, there's the majority of car crashes, then they lack seat belts or restraints for children, then we concentrate on those communities to provide education and then provide a car seat if we have enough.
Many people don't even think about ever needing a trauma facility. And they should know and they should understand that it is an incredible asset to have in your community. It's based inside UMC, which is a not-for-profit hospital. It's a hospital that takes care of everyone.
Major League Baseball certainly has its sights set on the Sun City, specifically our medical facilities. MLB sent its vice president, Ernell Lucas, to tour El Paso, and he stopped at University Medical Center. Any city with a major league affiliated club needs to ensure that players and fans have access to good medical care.
Whenever we get visits from companies who are thinking of relocating or thinking of building something new here, they look at the assets of a community. And the assets of a community include your workforce, education, transportation, quality of life, and health care.
Officials say the fact that UMC is a level 1 trauma center is one reason the Pacific Coast League approved the sale of the Tucson Padres. That's a team that could call El Paso home if the sale is approved.
Healthcare is a critical asset in general when you're looking to be an attractive, competitive community.
I did not realize until, I guess, later that night or the next day that really was the only place for him to go. I think actually I asked one of the police officers, why did you take him there? And they said, that's exactly where he needs to be. He needs to be at that hospital. That's the only hospital here that has a chance of saving him.
The thing with trauma, it doesn't discriminate. You can be rich, you can be poor, you can be young or old, you can be a nice person, a bad person, you can be super drunk, or you can be a saint, and we don't discriminate. You come in, you're injured, we don't care what your story is. Our job is to take care of you, make sure you're fixed.